Bible Worm, reading the Bible with Bible Worm.
Welcome to Bible Worm, getting to the core of the biblical text. I'm Dr. Robert Williamson, Professor of Religious Studies at Hendrix College and Theologian in Residence of Canvas Community in Little Rock, Arkansas.
And I'm Dr. Amy Robertson, Director of Lifelong Learning and Music at Congregation Or Hadash in Sandy Springs, Georgia. We're here every week to discuss the biblical text, both as biblical scholars and as people of faith, one Jewish and one Christian.
For this special episode, we're reading the Narrative Lectionary text for both Maundy Thursday and Good Friday in John 19, 23-42. The text opens with two starkly different scenes set at the foot of the cross where Jesus is dying. On the one side, Roman soldiers gamble to see who gets to keep Jesus' nice garment, indifferent to the agony of the one they are executing. At the same time, on the other side of the cross, unfolds a tender scene in which Jesus stitches together a new relationship between his mother and the beloved disciple, creating a new family formed at the foot of the cross. Which group will we join, we wonder? Those who fight over scraps while ignoring our own cruelty, or those who are knit together in unexpected ways by the God of love? Thanks for joining us. Hey, Amy, it's time for our Good Friday special episode.
It is time for our Good Friday special episode.
I don't know quite how to greet you because we greet each other with some enthusiasm and maybe some banter about our lives, but somehow Good Friday special episode feels like the tone. I mean, it's called Good Friday, but it's not that great of a Friday, really.
So can I just ask that question as a person outside the tradition that calls the day of this, the day that commemorates Jesus' death, that calls it Good Friday?
It's like the worst Friday, really, that one could imagine.
So tell me about that. How do you, not the official church teaching about it, I mean, whatever, you can tell me that if you want to, but how do you inhabit the name of this day being Good Friday?
The by the book answer is no one really knows for sure how we ended up with Good Friday, but there are kind of two prevailing ideas about it as far as I know. One is that it was originally called God's Friday, and it sort of became in the way that language does, it kind of transitioned itself to Good Friday. And so God's Friday is a little more clear about how you would get there. It's, the day on which kind of the times change or something like that. Mm-hmm. The other way that I hear it talked about is that while the Friday appears horrible in the moment, once you have arrived on the other side of Easter, when the death leads to a resurrection, that in Christian understanding is for the salvation and healing and well-being of humankind, then it turns out that the Friday really was a Good Friday, and it was the Friday that was necessary in order to get to the best of the things. And so you can think of it that way.
In ways you can only kind of understand from the other side of
right. In my own experience, I grew up in a church that did not really acknowledge the existence of Good Friday. I don't know if this was common or if it was just my church, but on Thursday, we would have a service that was the Maundy Thursday service where Jesus gathers with his disciples. There's a little sense of foreboding in Maundy Thursday, but it's basically like we all get together and Jesus is with his friends and you have communion and it's nice. And then the next thing I knew, it was Sunday. And so we kind of skipped the actual downward bend of the arc.
Yeah.
And so it's only as an adult that I have really sort of found my way into acknowledging Good Friday. But I've come to think that it's probably one of the most important things to live in that, somewhere between Good Friday and what we call Holy Saturday, which is liturgically when we're remembering that things seemed really bad. And then on Saturday seems like you have encountered the end and there is no future. And being able to sit in that kind of feeling for a couple of days even,
Yeah.
which is the way that humans spend a lot of our actual life, I think. And then only come to the resurrection after having sat in reality for a little bit. So I have tried to be more that way lately. Do you connect with that in any kinds of ways as a person or out of your tradition?
I mean, maybe not like exactly, but there are many places in the Jewish liturgical calendar where we are really sort of asked, required sounds like a little bit too strong of a word, but like we are to do the best we can to take ourselves through an emotional cycle, like through like a really profound, I don't know, imaginative process, or like to try to put ourselves in the place of our ancestors through various moments in history and really like emotionally inhabit what that was. And that's a hard thing to do, as you know. And so my tradition tries to give us a lot of what we imagine would be sort of the trappings of that to help us do it. So things like at, Tisha B'Av, that commemorates the destruction of the temple, you sit on the floor and you fast and like there's sort of like mourning practices you take on. But as we all know, it is also possible to do those things in an empty way without, and then feel like you checked the box without actually doing the emotional work it's asking you to do. So it's just hard emotional work. And so maybe everyone needs to find their way to how to do it in the best way they can.
Yes. Last night, we are recording this during Ramadan, and last night I was at the local Muslim center at one of the mosques in town. My wife's congregation provided the iftar meal for the Muslim community.
Oh,
and I was thinking about that. Like there's something about being at an iftar breaking of the fast. Would you yourself have not been fasting? That feels a little like it's nice to be together with the community. But I was like, oh, these people are doing something serious and beautiful that I am not doing. And so it made me think about how I might incorporate some of those in my own way. And you're talking about Tisha B'Av, kind of makes similar idea of like, what are the ways that I can inhabit that differently from my growing up where we just skipped the hard parts and went straight to Easter. And so I'm going to think more about that this year. Well, Amy, our text for today is the text in which Jesus was placed on the cross in our last regular episode.
AKA crucified.
He was crucified.
Yes. That is what crucified means. Placed on the cross.
Yes. And so he has not yet died, but he has been placed on the cross. And so today's story in John 19:23-42 takes us from that moment through his death and to his burial. And then we will leave it there until our next regular episode where we'll move to the Easter text. And so I was going to say this is a difficult text, but this year of the Narrative Lectionary has had us in really hard texts related to the last day of Jesus's life for like a month. And so in some ways, this arriving here feels different to me this year than it has in some other years.
No, that's right. They're really like the texts of Lent have really been hard, as maybe they should be.
Is there anything that you want to remind us about or connections you want to make before we get into this text?
So we're picking right up in the verse after where we left off last time, the verse where Jesus is crucified, as you just said. What I'm remembering, or one thing I'm remembering from that text, is my own sense reading it of how sort of zoomed out it was, sort of like you were watching it unfold, but I didn't feel as a reader like I had very much access to the person of Jesus in it. Like you were sort of watching it unfold. It felt in that text to me very much like Jesus had been surrounded by all these people before, and now Jesus was very much alone. And I raise that because in this text, we'll get one last sort of moment with the person of Jesus as he's on the cross, and he will have some people around him. And that felt like, that felt sort of important to my heart to have that part of the story filled in there. Is there anything else you would want to remind us of?
I think that's really important. The only other thing, and I don't know if this plays in or not, is just to remember that Jesus has been crucified with a placard over his head that says, King of the Jews.
Yes.
So we've got that still playing in the background, this issue of is and in what way could Jesus be thought of as king or not?
Yeah.
And so just that sort of whole royal landscape, I think, is in our background. I'll pick up then in John 19:23. I'm reading in the Common English Bible. When the soldiers crucified Jesus, they took his clothes and sandals and divided them into 4 shares, one for each soldier. His shirt was seamless, woven as one piece from the top to bottom. They said to each other, "Let's not tear it. Let's cast lots to see who will get it." This was to fulfill the scripture. They divided my clothes among themselves, and they cast lots for my clothing. That's what the soldiers did. Jesus' mother and his mother's sister Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene stood near the cross. When Jesus saw his mother and the disciple whom he loved standing nearby, he said to his mother, "Woman, here is your son." Then he said to the disciple, "Here is your mother." And from that time on, this disciple took her into his home. This little section of text has 2 very starkly contrasting gatherings of people sort of juxtaposed to one another. The first is this group of 4 soldiers that it tells us who are dividing up his belongings to divide amongst themselves. There's a scriptural reference here that this is fulfilling a scripture. Can you just walk us into this, I don't know, picture this being painted by the scripture and by the dividing of clothes?
So the scriptural reference is to Psalm 22, which notably for me is the same psalm that is not quoted by John, but is quoted by Mark, that my God, why have you forsaken me, is the beginning of this psalm. And so with that kind of beginning, you can imagine what kind of psalm it is we're talking about here. This is really a psalm that is laying out in very painful, evocative language this sense of abandonment that many people experience at some point during their lives. The verse that they're pulling on here in Christian Bibles is Psalm 22, verse 18. If you're looking at a Hebrew Bible, it's verse 19. But I want to read you the verse before it also just to give it a little more context. I take the count of all my bones while they look on and gloat. They divide my clothes among themselves, casting lots for my garments. I just find that image so, such an image of suffering and degradation. I take count of all my bones. You can imagine someone who is really near starvation, and what they have left to do in their aloneness is count their bones while other people laugh at them. And for me, that really puts this context of others taking their clothing as, we've talked about reading the text in the Hebrew Bible where it says you can't take someone's garment as a pledge if that's the only garment they have.
Oh, yeah.
And that is exactly what this feels like to me. Like this person is so vulnerable and is suffering, and people are going to take their clothes and divide them amongst themselves. I don't know if I'd say anything else about the context, but I wonder, Bobby, whether you think all of that feeling is being pulled in here by John, or whether you think he is pointing in particular, like he's just, or whether he really just wants to get that image of dividing the clothing because it's a way to tie something that is happening in real time to something that was in scripture before.
There's always a question when the Gospels drop in a reference to, especially to a psalm, also to prophetic texts, but especially to the Psalms, about whether we should read the whole psalm as context or whether we should take the verse. And so I think you're asking a question that has a long and storied history and about which everyone is not agreed. One of the things I think as an interpreter, we're always making decisions about how should we and what can we open up if we make certain interpretive moves. We're never going to know what the writer of John intended for us to do. One thing I think is clear enough is that the early Christians processed the death of Jesus through Psalm 22. And so you can kind of see different parts of that psalm playing out. And so for me, I think the way you're reading it, which is here's this other verse in the same psalm that really draws me in interpretively. I think if that psalm has energy for us like that, we should draw on it.
Go with the energy. Yeah.
But not necessarily that we need to now go interpret all of Psalm 22 and say that's Jesus.
Yeah.
But make the connections when the connections have life in them.
Mm.
What you're saying there about that verse prior to this one and counting Jesus's bones, I mean, you can see it here that in the Roman practice, Jesus is naked on the cross and his clothes have been taken off of him. This is what Romans did to people. Mm. It was, I think part humiliation, degradation, part maybe just practicality. He's got clothing and people could use those clothes. Mm. And so instead of waiting for 24 or 48 or 72 hours for a crucified person to die so you could take his clothes, then let's just take them at the beginning. But it does kind of draw your attention in that way to the, up on the cross, there is a naked Jesus whose body has been abused, and you can see the wounds of his body. And then down below, there is this scene of the soldiers kind of, I don't know if they're making fun of him or they're indifferent to him or what they are exactly, but he's just right there and they are kind of making a deal about how to sort out the clothing. Yeah. Can you get yourself into the head of the Roman soldiers?
I think that's such a good question, Bobby. And I mean, one thing I wondered about their mindset was whether there was some aspect of paparazzi behavior almost. I don't know how famous Jesus was at this point. How much the soldiers would have known that this is a story people know. Oh yeah. And so I'm not saying it necessarily as they were followers of Jesus. Maybe that's possible. I don't know. But even just this big thing happened and I have a piece of it myself, that's sort of more, it's a little bit of a gross thing that humans do, that they want to have some piece of the action when some big drama unfolds. And I wondered about that.
So they know that this is going to be a momentous occasion and they want a memento from this moment in particular because it's Jesus.
Because it's Jesus.
Yeah.
That's what I wondered.
I had not considered that reading. It's a really interesting one to say this, something momentous is happening here. Let me take home a souvenir.
Let me take home a souvenir, and I don't know what any of this means. So how do you read the soldiers, Bobby?
Well, I was sort of reading them as, here we have powerful people like the religious leaders and the Roman procurator who are making life and death decisions. And then here you have working class soldiers who might well be underpaid, who are doing awful things. And this is part of the way that they make their living is by taking the property of the people that they execute and taking it home with them, to feed their families, basically.
Oh, wow.
And so getting caught in this system where they are, I don't know how they felt about it. And you were talking last week when they were mocking Jesus about maybe this is self-protection. We can't face what we're doing. Yeah. So we're going to think about something else. But, people, I sort of think of them as people who are with barely a living wage.
Yes.
And so they are doing what they must and taking what they can in order to make ends meet. Mm. They divide the clothing into 4 parts, but the tunic gets special attention here as woven in one piece. And that seems to be they don't want to cut it. They don't want to tear it. Yeah. So this is how they end up casting lots. And so one way of sort of thinking about it is, that as John sort of tells us, this is so they had to cast lots so they could fulfill the scripture. Fair enough. But if you they're not trying to fulfill scripture, right? And so do you have a sense of like why or what would you do with this not wanting to rip his tunic?
I don't know if you just said like they're not trying to fulfill scripture. And so I don't know if they would have been sensitive to this either. But Josephus reports that the high priest wears a tunic like this, that is all one piece and doesn't have seams. So again, sort of standing outside the story and with more information than the people in the story might have had, I could look at it and say maybe that detail needs to be in there, and maybe that doesn't explain why they would have wanted to preserve it, though. Maybe that just explains why there would have been it would have been important for there to be a seamless tunic in the story anyway.
Yeah. That high priest detail is really interesting to me. And, the options I think that they have here are they could cut the tunic into 4 pieces. And now they've each got a nice piece of cloth. Or they could preserve the tunic as a whole. Yeah. And the fact that this is the type of tunic worn by the high priest might suggest it is a rather nice tunic that one would want to have. And so it's the like prized possession.
Yes.
And so it's more valuable if you don't cut it. And so they're sort of casting lots to see who gets the big prize and who gets the other things.
And that I feel like is supportive of the theory that you put forth that like these guys are really living on the edge. Like they actually need these things.
Yeah. It also highlights the callousness of this situation where they are being very tender with this valuable tunic, even after they have just brutalized a human body and hung it on a cross. But we got to take care of the tunic. We don't want to tear that.
Yeah.
And so just the disconnect, protective mechanism, whatever it is, callousness.
Yes.
In stark contrast to that scene, there is gathered around the cross, seemingly, in my mind anyway, it's like on one side of the cross, there are the soldiers like gambling over these clothes. And then we get some gathering of people who are around the cross with Jesus. In the CEB, they're named as Jesus' mother, his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and Mary Magdalene. Is that how it reads in the NRSV too?
Yes.
It's not entirely clear in the English to me, or in the Greek actually, whether it is 1, Jesus' mother, 2, his mother's sister, 3, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and 4, Mary Magdalene, or whether it's 1, Jesus' mother, 2, his mother's sister, Mary, the wife of Clopas, and 3, Mary Magdalene.
Yeah.
I don't know that it matters.
Yeah.
Other than it makes my little Christian head spin that in the other Gospels, Jesus' mother is named Mary. And she would also have a sister named Mary, and they have a friend named Mary. And I'm like, come on, guys! Like, just name somebody
4 women,
else.
all named Mary.
Yes.
Oh no, actually, in that case, we wouldn't know Mary's name. I mean, again, I don't know, but it seems like there were 4 soldiers in the last scene. So having 4 women here who are people who love Jesus.
Oh, I like that
as a nice contrast.
Yeah. I love that. You did so much of a more thoughtful interpretation than me.
I just said, look, 4 and 4. That was very thoughtful.
Yeah, but then you paralleled that. I'm just like, how can there be 2? John's gospel never actually calls Jesus' mother Mary.
Yeah.
And so it could be that anyway. The other connection that one could make if we are readers of the gospel, John is not trying to get us to make this, but there is a disciple named Cleopas in Luke 24 when the disciples are walking toward Emmaus. And there's a disciple we've never met named Cleopas. And so if you want to read that, like Mary, the wife of Clopas, you could read Clopas as Cleopas. So that's that disciple. And maybe this woman is that second disciple in Luke 24. This is down a road that it has nothing really to do with John, but it's kind of interesting. There's also a disciple there who is the beloved disciple, the disciple whom he loved. That character is a curious one. We do not meet that character until Jesus is reclining at the Last Supper in John's Gospel. in chapter 13, and we meet the beloved disciple there. And then we see the beloved disciple here, and then we will encounter the beloved disciple next week on Easter. And so there's that argument about the identity of that disciple, whether it's the gospel writer, whether that gospel writer is John. Some people say the beloved disciple is Lazarus, because in John 11 it said Jesus loved Lazarus. I don't know how to settle that, and I don't know how much it matters to me.
Yeah.
Did you have thoughts about how to settle that, or whether it matters to you?
I don't have real thoughts how to settle it. I think I have two thoughts. One is that it's interesting to me that it says there are these 4 women, and then just right in the next verse, clearly there's also someone else there.
Yes.
But it's just interesting to me that person wasn't described in the initial group of 4 women.
Yeah.
And the namelessness and, at least in English, genderlessness of that disciple, I feel like that invites a person to picture it as themselves.
Oh, I like that.
I don't know if that's a fair game reading, but
I think so. I have not encountered that reading. Surely there are interpreters who make that move. But I like that a lot, as this is an invitation. This is what you're saying, right? As an invitation for me or you or any reader of the gospel to see ourselves.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to do that.
As the beloved disciple.
Yeah, it's like the Jewish teaching that every Jewish soul was present at Sinai.
I love that.
And to imagine that you were present beside Jesus' mother.
The text tells us that what Jesus does, he sees his mother and this beloved disciple standing nearby, and he kind of gives them to each other. Here is your son. Here is your mother. And then it says that the beloved disciple takes Jesus' mother into his home. Yeah. From that time on, so it sounds like this is like a relationship that lasts the rest of their lives.
Yeah.
How do you understand what Jesus is doing there?
I mean, it's so beautiful and painful and beautiful, but to sort of have this moment that, Jesus in his life in a body on the earth is exiting the scene, and he knows, on the one hand, you could read it as a way of honoring his mother and knowing that his mother's going to need people to care for her. But it's also, I feel like, an invitation for that Jesus is exiting the way that he has been in the story is changing. And so they're going to need to care for each other. And the ways that he might have mediated relationships directly before, like all these individuals had relationships with him, they're going to have relationships with each other, through the memory of Jesus or the love of Jesus or however you want to talk about that. But it's like he's like weaving those two strands together directly.
I love that reading, Amy. And, one of the reasons that I'm kind of taken by your reading of the beloved disciple as the reader of the Gospel of John is because I think that what is happening here, like the forming of new family bonds at the foot of the cross, is what's happening in this moment. And also, it is what Jesus intends to happen among his followers more generally. And so going back to John 13, like, here's the new commandment, love one another as I have loved you, and so on, that Jesus is giving us to each other, people who we might not be related to biologically or were raised with in family. Now, when we gather together at the foot of the cross, they become our family that sort of ripples out beyond. So I like that. I like that reading a lot. The tenderness of reading, the way you're reading it in this moment, and also the implications of it more broadly, I think are really beautiful.
Hi, y'all. It's Amy, one of your friendly co-hosts, and I want to tell you why Bible Worm is important to me. There's a Jewish tradition that Torah study is best done with a partner, a Havruta, we call it, someone who pushes you beyond where you would have gone on your own. Bobby was essentially my Havruta for 10 years of grad school, and I've never found a thought partner quite like him. So when he asked if I wanted to read texts together, There was no real thought process before I said yes. The decision to record this podcast the way we do was risky. We don't have a script. We don't pre-talk things. We are thinking together live. And it is my hope that precisely because of that, you feel invited to think along with us. Because everyone needs a Hevruta. And if you don't have one, I hope you will let us be yours. If this way of being in relationship to biblical text speaks to you the way it speaks to me, I hope you'll help sustain us through Patreon at whatever level makes sense for you. There are some nice perks if you need them. Liturgies, videos, monthly discussion groups. This year I've added some recordings of the chanting of these texts that you might hear in a synagogue. Or you can just support us to show your appreciation and help us know that this work matters. Thanks for listening and for supporting us however you can.
All right, I'll pick up then in verse 28. After this, knowing that everything was already completed, in order to fulfill the scripture, Jesus said, "I am thirsty." A jar full of sour wine was nearby, so the soldiers soaked a sponge in it, placed it on a hyssop branch, and held it up to his lips. When he had received the sour wine, Jesus said, "It is completed." Bowing his head, he gave up his life. It was the preparation day, and the Jewish leaders didn't want the bodies to remain on the cross on the Sabbath, especially since that Sabbath was an important day. So they asked Pilate to have the legs of those crucified broken and the bodies taken down. Therefore the soldiers came and broke the legs of the two men who were crucified with Jesus. When they came to Jesus, they saw that he was already dead, so they didn't break his legs. However, one of the soldiers pierced his side with a spear, and immediately blood and water came out. The one who saw this has testified, and his testimony is true. He knows that he speaks the truth, and he has testified so that you also can believe. These things happened to fulfill the scripture. They won't break any of his bones. And another scripture says, they will look at him whom they have pierced. Amy, this scene that begins in the beginning of that little passage I just read in verse 28 with the sour wine and the hyssop, those details seem significant, but it is not immediately clear just as you're reading it what the significance might be.
Yeah.
Did you find your way into that in some kind of a way?
Maybe a couple different ways that I don't know if they all fit together. One way, I'll start with the hyssop, and maybe I imagine that the wine is a reddish color. Hyssop, I mean, look, my understanding of it is it's a plant that the shape of it is a little bit like a paintbrush. Like it has sort of like, ends that you could use to swab something on something else. And it is what is used in the Exodus story to sort of paint the blood of the lamb on the doorpost before the angel of death passes over. And it is also used in some other stories where there's some kind of swabbing of blood in that sort of ritualized way. And so I wondered if the use of hyssop here is supposed to bring my mind to that, or if that's just the tool that they had at that time and I'm kind of overthinking it.
I like that interpretation a lot. And, John is not being shy about connecting us in this gospel to the events of Passover. And as we, when we get the detail again here that this is right before the Sabbath, and the Sabbath that is coming is Passover. And so we are in the afternoon, headed toward the evening of the day of preparation. The Passover lambs are being slaughtered at the temple at this moment, preparing for the meal that are going to be eaten that evening. And so Passover is just everywhere in the theological air of the Gospel of John in this moment. And so I think you would be remiss if you did not say hyssop is kind of a strange reference. Look, there it is in Exodus 12. Yeah. And so I don't think you're overreading at all. I think you are gesturing towards something that's really important. I don't know exactly how it lands, hyssop giving wine, which is blood colored to Jesus. It's not exactly a one-to-one with painting blood over the door frame, but it is in the like metaphorical neighborhood.
Yes.
And so to say like this is evocative.
It is certainly evocative, yes. I can't draw you like a logical linear equation of what exactly John is going for, but it's certainly evocative.
I was telling you before we started recording that I somehow stumbled my way into reading an audiobook of the biography of the band REM, who was one of my favorite bands in college. And this is reminding me of a description of the way that their lead singer, Michael Stipe, writes lyrics, which is they are powerfully evocative symbols that don't entirely square. And so like the meaning of them, the story he is telling is like out of the frame. And you can't just make it work, but it's saying something really important. And so I'm kind of reading John as like the Michael Stipe of the first century.
Oh, that's really...
Here. In some of the ways, maybe not in all of the ways.
Yeah.
So I don't think we need to square this hyssop image exactly is all I'm really saying.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. And just to throw in one more name alongside Michael Stipe and John, the priestly author in the Hebrew Bible is also known for this sort of like kind of laying different things on top of each other in an almost sort of like analogical way, but not exactly drawing the connection and like inviting the reader to draw the connection. I think it's part of what drives people nuts about this author is they don't just say the thing and they really want they want the thing, but it's really powerful if we sit with that and wonder about it.
Some people also connect this image of the sour wine to Psalm 69, which reminds me of the REM song Star 69. So there's another connection.
Wow. John's really giving us all these clues.
REM vibes today. And what in my reading, I'm like, that's a nice reference. And that's where that sort of ends for me. Did that go anywhere beyond? Like, did you do anything with the connection to Psalm 69?
I don't know if I did anything super deep other than Psalm 69 is another psalm that is really declaring deep suffering and says that I am suffering because I am faithful to you. That is why I'm being outcast like this. And so I don't know if all of that is being pulled in. My understanding of the way the vinegar comes into that psalm is that it's sort of an affront. Like, I am sick, I am suffering, and they give me gall for food and vinegar to quench my thirst. Like, these are not desirable things.
Yes.
When I encounter it here in John, I don't know, it doesn't sound as negative, but maybe it is meant to be. I don't know. Is this like an obnoxious thing? Not that they're these are people who love Jesus, so they're not giving him this because it's insulting in some way, but maybe it's an undesirable thing and the only thing that's available. Yeah,
it actually ends up being the soldiers who give it to him.
Oh.
And so they are not trying probably to comfort him, but they are quenching his thirst. Is that how it's read in the NRSV?
That's a Greek. It doesn't say who did it. It
just says they.
A jar full of sour wine was standing there, so they put a sponge full of wine on a branch of hyssop and held it to his mouth.
Oh, interesting.
And since we had just read about the disciples, I assumed it was the disciples who did that.
That is interesting. It's not there, and the noun isn't there. It's just a plural verb. And so you have a decision to make, and it really reads entirely differently.
It really
as we just discovered,
differently.
If it's the people who love him, and this is the best they can do to be tender for him.
Yeah.
Or the soldiers who are like, fine, if you're thirsty.
Yeah, have some garbage.
I mean, there are two details here that are just interesting to me in the way that they're worded. Verse 28, after everything was completed, and then when Jesus, just before he dies, he says, it is completed. Or sometimes that's translated, finished, it is finished.
Mm-hmm.
This is the same word that was used back in chapter 13:1, where it said, Jesus loved them until the end. It's all variations of the word telos. And so it is distinctive to talk about this as being finished and Jesus saying it is finished. Did you take that wording anyplace?
I felt the sort of energy of it, I guess, but I did not know the connection back to chapter 13. I read it in this context as sort of, I want to say suffering, but it's not quite suffering. But like this great dramatic struggle, like the enormity of this thing that has happened, meaning both Jesus's life on earth and this incredibly intense and sorrowful end, that I feel a sense of relief when I read the words, "It is finished."
Yes.
Instead of sadness,
Yeah.
which I just realized as I was saying the words. Do you feel that?
I appreciate the way that you're reading that, sort of like it's done, like it's over. And I do, like, I had not processed it. Like, I feel that instead of feeling sadness, but I'm with you. And, when people in certain situations have died in my orbit, there are some deaths where I say it's good that that's over. Like, I'm sad, but also that needed to end.
Yeah.
And so reading it that way is kind of an evocative way of reading it. There is also that sense of Jesus had a mission to do, and he has done the mission.
Yes.
And the mission involved him giving up his life in this way, being raised up on a cross as the king who is also not a king.
Yeah.
And it is accomplished. He has done what needs to be done.
Yeah.
I actually think you are onto something, that John is not that interested in this being a sad and sorrowful, maybe even painful scene. Like, it is, obviously.
Yeah.
But that's not his focus. Jesus has kind of been in charge of this whole thing, and he needs to do it. This is what needs to happen. And now it is finished. Which leads me to the last thing I wanted to ask you in this little part is he gave up his life is also an interest. It's not just he died, but he's the subject of the verb in which his life ends.
Yes. That was a little mysterious to me, because I would not have imagined that Jesus was trying to hold on to his life.
Mm-hmm.
Other than, as you were saying, throughout even these terrible last days or terrible last day, Jesus has had to be careful that someone else didn't intervene to save him.
Yes.
So maybe there is a sense that because he has reached the end of the mission, he can sort of relax, and that's what relaxing looks like.
Yeah.
I don't know, Bobby. Help me.
He hands
Please
it
help
over.
me.
No, I take your point. I've never thought about Jesus relaxing on the cross before, so that
thank
kind of
God.
makes me laugh a little bit. But the idea that he has held on to this as long as he needs to, and now he can lay it down, I think makes a lot of sense. It also, I remember thinking this the last time we went through the Gospel of John, that you really need to listen to the special episodes to make this gospel kind of make sense. And here it is, because this laying down or giving up his life is an echo, I think, of the passage we read for Ash Wednesday, in which it says that the shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. And so this is the same idea. And the way that I'm reading that is the Romans and the religious leaders did not take Jesus's life from him. He laid it down on behalf of the people. And so if he had wanted to protect his life, he could have.
Yes.
And he did not choose to do that. He chose to lay it down, to demonstrate that the taking of someone else's life, I think, is not the way that communities are healed, or something like that.
Yeah. Yeah, that reminds me too of his conversation with Pilate when Pilate's asking if he's a king, and he says, my kingdom's not from here. And then raising the idea that, like, if it was, his supporters would be there fighting.
Exactly. That's a nice connection. So John then reminds us that it's the preparation day, in case we had forgotten. He had given us that once before.
In case you forgot, yeah.
But now the fact that it's preparation day presents a certain urgency in the death process, because they want to have these bodies off of the crosses before the Sabbath, which is also the Passover, begins. Mm-hmm. And so that leads us to the breaking of the legs of the criminals. This is historically a thing that the Romans did do. Sometimes it would take people several days to die by crucifixion. And so breaking their legs hastened the process. The way crucifixion works is you sort of hold yourself up with your legs, but once your legs give out, then your chest cavity collapses and you suffocate. So once your legs are broken and you can't hold yourself up anymore, you suffocate more quickly. And so it hastens the death. I think the Romans might have, in their own twisted way, thought of this as like a mercy that they did for people to allow them to die. Mm-hmm. Here it takes on a whole other significance about Jesus dies before they can break his legs, and then we get a couple of scripture references about the breaking of legs. How did you understand what's going on here, the significance of it in this moment?
I mean, my most sort of straightforward understanding of it is that if we're thinking about an analogy to the Paschal sacrifice to the lamb has to be unblemished, is the translation of the word that's usually used in Hebrew, meaning it doesn't have other injuries to it. It doesn't have a broken leg. It doesn't have bruises. It doesn't have,
right.
If this is a perfectly intact offering. And so if Jesus is to be compared in that way, then you would not want his leg to be broken.
I think that's the right way to interpret that. It makes a lot of sense to me. And so then the world that we're in is Jesus is the Passover lamb who is being sacrificed at the time that the other Passover lambs are being sacrificed. And I think we have talked before about how that sort of follows through with John's theory of the atonement, which is less about the cleansing properties of blood, which is not what the Passover lamb does, but with the protective capacity of blood. Mm-hmm. So when it is put over the door, it protects Israelites from death, the angel of death in the book of Exodus. Mm-hmm. Here, Jesus' blood, which marks the followers of Jesus in some way, protects them from death. And so we don't seem to have here an atonement that is like Jesus' blood cleanses people of sin, but Jesus' blood protects people from the angel of death. The other detail that we get here is, so they don't break his legs because he's already dead. And so they stab him instead. I think what they're doing is just checking to make sure he's really dead. Yeah. But the gospel writer says blood and water came out. And then it is very insistent. The one who saw it says this is true. It's really true. You can believe it's true. And so it really matters to this writer that blood and water came out.
Yeah.
And maybe that his legs weren't broken. I'm not sure exactly what he's testifying to, but how do you think about the blood and water here?
It's such an evocative image for me because, they must, in order to be able to see that, they must have come out in discrete streams, like blood and water mixed together look like blood.
Yeah.
So, that's not an interpretation. That's just, it's such an image in my mind of what it would look like for them both to be there. It's making me think about, you just said this is not really a story of purification, but it is making me think about purification, both in terms of Hebrew Bible ritual and sort of the new beginning, kind of the new beginnings of mikveh and baptism, that sort of cleansingness. Maybe it's making me think about birth.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. Those are the images that are coming up in my mind. what does this pull up for you?
Well, the male interpreter among us would not have gotten to the birth image, but I think that's a really evocative one. And I think the idea of purification, I don't mean to argue that the idea of purification is absent this text. And so I appreciate your calling us back, but I don't think it's forward in this text, especially in the significance of the crucifixion itself. I think reading the blood as related to the Christian sacrament of communion is reasonable. John does not give us that sacrament exactly, but this may be a gesture to it. And then the water as being evocative of the waters of baptism or the waters of the mikvah, as you're saying. That is the way this is sometimes read. I once had a pre-med student who told me that this is just what would actually happen if you stabbed a human body that died in this way. I do not know enough to follow that through, but some people have read this as just a straight indication that Jesus was a human being who was enfleshed in a real human body and not a phantasm as some early Christian belief systems had it.
Yeah.
The other thing that occurs to me is that story way back in John 4, where Jesus offers living water and says it will become a well that springs up inside of you. And one could read this, I think, as the blood of death and the spring of life, like emerging in the same moment in some kind of way. All right, there's yet one more section of text here, beginning in verse 38. After this, Joseph of Arimathea asked Pilate if he could take away the body of Jesus. Joseph was a disciple of Jesus, but a secret one, because he feared the Jewish authorities. Pilate gave him permission, so he came and took the body away. Nicodemus, the one who at first had come to Jesus at night, was there too. He brought a mixture of myrrh and aloe, nearly 75 pounds in all. Following Jewish burial customs, they took Jesus' body and wrapped it with the spices in linen cloths. There was a garden in the place where Jesus was crucified, and in the garden was a new tomb in which no one had ever been laid. Because it was the Jewish preparation day and the tomb was nearby, they laid Jesus in it. So these two characters who show up after the death of Jesus to tend to the body are not necessarily people I would have expected, especially not having read the Gospels, to show up. And so I'm just curious, how do you think about these two guys, Joseph of Arimathea? Let's start with him.
I don't remember Joseph of Arimathea.
We hear about him in the other Gospels in the same moment, but we have not heard about him in the Gospel of John because he was a secret disciple. Which I think is such an interesting detail.
I mean, I love that because for me, it just expands the whole story. Like, we've told you this whole story, and yet you don't know the whole story. Like, there are these, what do you mean the disciple who shows up at the moment of his death to care for his body as someone we never mentioned before?
Yeah.
That feels very expansive to me, very suggestive that the story in the community is bigger than we have known and bigger than we know.
I love that. And it shows, if you are a follower of Jesus, and especially an early follower of Jesus, that there may well be allies out there that you do not know are out there, and they will emerge when the time is right for them or something like that.
Oh, that's beautiful.
Nicodemus, of course, is the Pharisee that we met back in John 3, who came to Jesus at night, and they had that conversation about being born again.
Yeah. The Nicoderm guy.
The Nicoderm guy, Nicodemus.
Yeah.
Here he is at the sort of culminating moment of Jesus's earthly existence. I did not know he was going to make an appearance here. I mean, I did, but
Yeah.
He also, by the way, shows up in a text that we did not read in John 7, 50 to 52. The Pharisees are having an argument about Jesus, and Nicodemus tells them in that text, you should at least hear somebody out before you condemn them. And so Nicodemus sort of punctuates this gospel early, middle, and end.
I have to say, I did not know he was going to be coming back. And it is one of my favorite parts of the whole story that he does. Because I feel like to me, he's just sort of emblematic of like, he came to Jesus. It was not the perfect interaction, like he came under cover of night. Maybe he was afraid. He was not being super brave. He didn't understand what Jesus was talking about over and over again. Like he was just like, I don't get it. And so it'd be easy to read that first interaction and say like, well, there's some idiot Pharisee that doesn't get it. And part of what I love about this story is I still don't know what exactly he gets or doesn't get.
Yes.
But he's here.
Yes.
Like he's here. He is taking the next step and doing the thing that seems right to him in the moment. And I just feel like it's such a spacious invitation into relationship and religious belief and relationship with God, and to allow all kinds of imperfect and incomplete interactions and thoughts and feelings, and you can still stay in it.
I love that, Amy. And the way you're talking about that is reminding me that we have seen that sort of progression all through this gospel, even from the very first chapter, where it's like, who's that guy? Come and see. And then people go, they don't know what they're looking at, but they come to realize. Or in John 4 with the woman at the well, she's first like, who are you, strange man? And then like by the end, she's like, maybe this is the Messiah.
Right. And she just brings that question out into the public and says like, maybe so. This is the Messiah. Like, I'm not here to make a fully articulated case with like a PowerPoint, but like, I think something's happening, and I invite you into this unknowing, but maybe space with me. Yeah.
There's also the man who's blind from birth in chapter 9, who just keeps saying, I was blind and now I see. I don't know what that means. And then Jesus is like, hey, do you believe in the Son of Man? And he's like, I want to, but I don't know. So we talked about how that too is that story. And so Nicodemus has that kind of arc. Yeah. It's just across the whole gospel.
It's a long arc for Nicodemus. And it would be very easy to think that it was not an arc because you only read some little piece of it.
I love that this seems like it could be a dangerous moment to reveal oneself as somebody who cares for Jesus. Yeah. They go to Pilate and they say, hey, can we have the body? We're told that Joseph was afraid of the religious authorities. And so suddenly in this moment, their fear is gone, or they're acting in spite of their fear, I guess. And they lavish, like this amount of spice is like crazy, 75 pounds of spices. It is
That's
abundant.
Really a lot of spices.
In the way that when Mary anointed Jesus' feet in chapter 12, it was an overabundance of oil, and here an overabundance of spices. I don't know, I just think this is a really lovely scene of these two sort of unknown. Well, one of them is unknown and the other is kind of, we know him, but we don't think of him as quite getting it. And yet they're the ones who show up here in this moment to tend to Jesus' body. Yeah, to tend to it immediately. And, it says, according to the burial custom of the Jews, like according to tradition, this is like the way to honor a body after death. And also knowing they have to be, they don't have a lot of time. They have to get on to the next thing. And so there's a space nearby that they can put this body, and that's where it's going to go. Like there's an urgency and a practicality about it, but also real reverence and I would say in Hebrew kavod, like real respect and like a sense of gravitas in what it is to care for this body. I love that observation that you can kind of do the quick practical thing that needs to be done and also be honoring of the person and the situation at the same time. All right, Amy. Well, this brings us to the end of our Good Friday text. When we talk again, it'll be Easter. But for the moment, we're going to linger here. As you read this text and you think about where you see connections between it and the world in which we are living, what are you seeing?
What is coming to my mind is a conversation I had with a friend last night who belongs to a religious community in sort of the Jewish Christian realm. I don't want to give sort of too many identifiers here. And had been really profoundly moved by the walk for peace that a group of Buddhist monks did
Yes.
over the winter. They walked from somewhere in Texas, I think,
I think so.
to Washington, D.C., and would stop along the way, and different groups of people would meet them. And I also became sort of really a big fan of this and kind of followed their travels. But this friend of mine, at the urging of her mom, went to one of the stops that they made. And there were lots of people gathered there, and there was someone wearing a t-shirt that was celebrating a political perspective that was really the opposite of hers. And her very first thought was, that's disgusting, or that's hateful, or I'm so angry. I'm angry at you for being in the world with that perspective. Like, you're ruining all the feelings we have about people who we think
Yes.
are causing harm through our political systems. And then she had a moment where, for whatever reason, maybe the message that the monks were bringing them, maybe just being in that space, she thought like, well, okay, yes, and we have this thing in common. We've both come to see these monks who are on a walk for peace and are trying to increase compassion. And it's not that solved the conflict between them, but it stitched their stories together in a way that made it possible for her to see what is shared instead of what separates them. What made me think of that in this text is that moment at the cross where there is some beloved disciple and Jesus' mom. And as Jesus is about to depart from this earth, he stitches them together like through him, like through the shared experience of loving him. He creates this connection where there wasn't a connection before.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is religious community at its best, where people who hold a lot of different perspectives can slow down on our disagreements a little bit. Disagreements are important. But to be able to see through our shared love of God, whatever form that takes in our religious community, that we have a real connection to each other and to see each other with compassion. I don't know. I think that is the starting place of a lot of good, and a lot of good that will echo beyond the, confines of our own religious community. And that for me makes this today's reading a good story. There is real good that comes from this also really sad end.
That's so beautiful, Amy. As you were talking, I thought you were going to connect to the story in a different place. But I love where you connected. Where your thinking was taking me was to the possibility that maybe Nicodemus is not a Jesus follower. He continues to be a Jewish Pharisee who sees the good in Jesus and his followers. And so then that last scene, what you have is a secret follower of Jesus and a Jewish leader who both recognize that something profoundly tragic has happened to a person who is a force of good in the world.
Yes.
One of whom thinks he is the Son of God, and the other of whom thinks he is a good teacher and healer. And together they go and they tend to his body. And so, so that added into the kind of where you connected those two ideas together, I think are really, really lovely.
What about you, Bobby?
So I think I am also most drawn to that scene that you're pointing to at the foot of the cross, where people who did not belong to each other are connected to one another, and the vision of what that could mean for the community of followers of Jesus, or as you're reading it, for the broader community of people of conscience in the world. The place that there is a contrast is what the soldiers are doing at the foot of the cross. And I don't really want to talk about those guys, but I'm kind of drawn to those guys in the sense that the way that I was reading them earlier is they are just people trying to make their way in the world. They need to feed their kids. This is the job that they could find. They are being told to do immoral and amoral things by people more powerful than they are. And while Jesus is dying on the cross, they are ignoring him and arguing about the stuff, the material reality. And that contrasted in my mind is happening at the exact same moment and feet away from where the beautiful scene you were talking about of stitching people together. We have this scene of people separating from one another or disregarding one another or abusing one another because of the circumstance of the empire in which they find themselves. And so I think there's a lovely invitation that you're reading on the one hand, and there is a stringent warning on the other hand about the ways that we can treat one another when we cannot figure out how to emancipate ourselves from the logic of the empire and the power structure of its economic system. And they're just right there together. Like, which one of these do you want to be? And in the middle between those two is the crucified Jesus, who is giving his life as in some way the Passover lamb on another plane, whose blood is giving people the power to escape from the confines of the empire, the power that it has over us and the power of death that it wields. And so it's Jesus. It's this giving up, the King of the Jews, the King of however you want to think, Jesus the King, giving up his life, laying it down on purpose in order to set people free from the power of death. And it gives us that option for a Christian believer between, do we want to be that way that the soldiers are being over here, or do we want to be stitched together with people that don't naturally belong to us, but who can also see that the power of giving up on behalf of others has more life in it than the power of stealing from another person for the good of ourselves. So I think that it's the flip side of the same idea that you are so beautifully bringing to us.
No,
but I think that part is there too.
I think that part is there too. And that part is in the world. Both parts are in the world. Yeah.
So, Amy, that brings us to the conclusion of our conversation about Good Friday. When next I see you, we will be talking about Easter Sunday. In the meantime, we will be living somewhere in between those two, or at least I will. I don't know if this... I don't know how much the Christian scriptural tradition informs the way you live in the world, but...
Yeah.
You know.
It does in my preparations for Bible Worm.
Yeah, there you go. All right, Amy. Well, thanks for this conversation, and I'll see you next time.
I'll see you next time, Bobby. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for joining us for this week's episode of Bible Worm. If you've enjoyed this free podcast, we hope you'll help us keep it going by joining our Patreon for as little as $4 per month. You can also sign up for other goodies like early access, video lectures, weekly liturgies, and more. Visit patreon.com/BibleWormPodcast for details.
Bible Worm is produced and edited by Bobby Williamson. Our theme song is sung by Colin Bagby, and our theme music is The World at Large by Dano Songs. Many thanks to all our Patreon supporters for helping make this podcast possible.
Join us next time as we read the Easter story as told in John 20, 1-18. Until then, keep on digging.